Cincinnati Bengals fans are looking for changes. Let's answer some questions from fans that are wondering what needs to change for this team to turn it around.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Lisco. He's your host, James Rapine. We are Locked On Bengals on the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. We're on YouTube. We're everywhere you get your podcast. So shout out to the everydayers who have come back for another episode of Locked On Bengals as we get through the mini bye here, leading into Sunday Night Football, coming off of Thursday Night Football. And shout out to all of you who make us your first listen. We really do appreciate those of you who make us part of your daily routine, and welcome into the new listeners. And if you're looking for a daily stop for Cincinnati Bengals analysis and news, well, you're in the right place. You can hit that subscribe button to make sure you don't miss an episode. Today's episode of Locked On Bengals will be a mailbag. We're going to answer your questions, and a lot of you are very clearly unhappy, and rightly so, with the way this season is going. In an episode brought to you by FanDuel, where you can place and win a $5 bet to get $150 in bonus bets when you win that first $5 bet. You can check out FanDuel.com to get started. And James, the general tenor of questions in this mailbag was about as critical of the front office and as critical of the Bengals as I think I can remember in quite some time, which makes sense because outside of Joe Burrow's injury last year, it's been a while since we've been doing this show, and it's been a season for despair. The last times we've seen this team be relatively healthy, they've been on track and meeting expectations and making playoff runs. And this year, when healthy, not on track for a playoff run. And so the first question that we dive into today is reflecting on free agent classes. And Tom Cole asked, can we talk about Sheldon Rankins and Geno Stone specifically? Why is their playmaking from last year evaporated? Is it on Lou and the staff? Is it on the players? Is it on the front office? And to me, James, this opens the door to a broader conversation about the free agent class in general as well.
It does, and there's a lot here. Let's call it like it is. They're both free agent busts. That's what they've been. What we label draft picks busts really early in their career. I think of Dax Hill when it wasn't necessarily fair. Heck, even Miles Murphy right now, I think some people view it that way. And we just don't know yet because those guys haven't established themselves. There's no reason why Sheldon Rankins should just be done. And yet he looks done. I mean, his pressure rate, I believe, and I'm doing this off the top, is 2%. 2%. It's me in math class. He got 2%. That's not why he's here. The Bengals invested a ton of money in him, and I think he's the biggest disappointment of the season thus far. Like the biggest. Worse than Geno Stone because you're paying him. Geno's what, $7.5 million? Like it's much different when you're talking about a guy that one was supposed to help transform this defense into the next era that got up the middle pressure, and he hasn't done that. Two is at least part of the reason why DJ Reader isn't in town. And yeah, the Bengals are comfortable moving on from DJ, but maybe part of that was because they thought they could get Sheldon Rankins and get this interior guy that's going to generate pressure. And he hasn't done that. So I'm bummed, and I don't put that on the coaching staff. I don't put that on the front office either, because I think I get the logic. And the issue is he's either injured or done. And if he's injured, that really stinks, but get him out of there and have someone else, if you're the front office, in there that can do it. And they don't, of course. And then two, if he's done, then man, oh man, how did you not see this coming at least to a degree? And I think it's probably a mixture of both, but Sheldon Rankins just getting washed out, and you don't notice 98 at all. I know we'll get to Geno Stone, but this is my Sheldon Rankins rant. Really, really disappointed in what he's done so far.
Yeah, the expectation was that he would come in and be at least an okay pass rusher on the defensive interior, if not better. Like, that has been the strength of his game for the most part throughout his career. He's had seasons where he's been around a 10% pressure rate. Last year, he had 42 pressures on 431 pass rush snaps for the Texans. Years before that, 25 on 300, 24 on 400, 26 on 290, 22 on 230. So there's years where he's right around 10%, years where he's a little bit lower. But you have to go all the way back to his first year as a first-round draft pick. He's a 12th overall pick for the New Orleans Saints back in 2016. You have to go all the way back to his rookie year for anything that comes close to what he's done this year from a pressure productivity perspective. And that was 13 pressures on 243 snaps. Even that's better than what he's done this year, which is 4 pressures on 163 pass rushes. It's more than twice as good as his productivity this year. And that's his only year that really compares from a productivity standpoint to this year. And Rankins has always been a part-time pass rush kind of player for the most part. He did some more run defense responsibilities when he was with the Jets. He talked about that. We talked about that when they signed him, but he was signed by the Bengals to be a pass rusher. And they just haven't gotten that impact from him for whatever those reasons are. Maybe it's the snaps that he's playing. Maybe it's the way he's been deployed to some degree. If you wanted to look for reasons besides that he's just hit a wall or that he's injured, there could be some of that at play. But the bottom line is that he's just not producing at a level that was expected for him, not producing at a level that's consistent with his career. And you know how Over the Cap does those valuations where those valuation based on various factors. They're looking at stuff like, tackles for loss and sacks and that sort of defensive lineman, how many games they've played, etc. Sheldon Rankins at this point is an OTC over the cap value of under $1 million.
For sure.
He's getting paid over $12 million this season and is on the books next year for an $11.5 million cap hit. And the Bengals can get out of that pretty easily. He didn't have a big signing bonus. And a lot of people are asking, is he a cut candidate?
Yes.
And he's along with Geno Stone right now. And some others are cut candidates when we get to the offseason at this point in the season.
Yeah. And by the way, things can change. And so we're going to talk more about the front office, but the thing that annoys me, let's just say Sheldon Rankins is hurt and he's playing through it and he's got that big elbow brace on and his hamstring is getting better, but the elbow brace, there's something there with his arm. Well, you should have enough depth, even with him making what he is, to say, all right, we're going to get you healthy. We're going to get you right because we need you. We brought you in to make an impact when games are on the line. Right now, you're not doing that. We'll get you healthy. And do we think they can afford to do that? Now, you may argue, yeah, because he's not doing anything. But if you have the depth that is required to be successful in this league on the interior, then it would be fine. But you don't feel confident in that because you're banking on 2 rookies already. We've seen how thin that defensive line is behind BJ Hill and on the interior. So that's the part on the front office that's frustrating. But man, the Geno Stone one, I think you could make a really good argument that the safety play this year, Jake, is worse than it was last year. And maybe that's starting to change with Jordan Battle getting more reps. We'll see. But Geno Stone has been I think he's almost been worse in a lot of phases because you thought he would at least be buttoned up and communicate right and just do all of the basic things that veterans do. And it doesn't feel like he's doing any of them. He's not a sound tackler. He takes poor angles. They still give up big plays deep downfield. They still have miscommunication issues. All of those things. And then to top it off, we knew he wasn't a great athlete coming in. And so he just gets more and more exposed.
The tackling issue is actually pretty consistent with what he did at Baltimore, at least from a PFF tracking perspective. The missed tackle percentage right in line with his last 2 years in Baltimore. The big thing with Geno Stone that we're missing is where are the plays? Where are the big plays that he racked up in Baltimore over the last couple of years? Last year, all the interceptions that he put together. This year,
he's not finding those plays. He left them there.
And this one, I would, to some degree, say is the way he's being used. I think that it was just a much better fit and Mike Macdonald had a much better understanding of where to put his secondary. You're seeing the fall off for Mike Macdonald's departure in Baltimore from last year to this year as well, where you can pass all over the Ravens now. I think a lot of credit for Geno Stone is Mike Macdonald, perhaps, in retrospect, and the Bengals not getting that impact. But there's some other free agents, James, that we have not gotten to yet. We will need to continue the discussion going into our next segment here as we wrap up our review of the Bengals 2024 free agent class and where the Bengals just aren't getting enough as this 2024 season goes on. We'll do that next. This episode of Locked On Bengals is sponsored by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, and it's the best place to get into the NFL action right now because new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL in one place. So if it's more than just Sunday Night Football that you want to get into this weekend, you can check out the latest stats. You can check out live play-by-play all on the same page where you place your bets with FanDuel. Again, you can check it all out at FanDuel.com to join today, and you get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook and official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
Today's show is also brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is daily fantasy the way it should be. So I know a lot of you and many of you, and I experienced the same thing. Yeah, you have injuries in your season-long leagues. Well, you don't have to worry about that with PrizePicks. And you also don't have to worry about thousands of other players. It's you versus the PrizePicks projection. So maybe you think that Chase Brown is going to have a big game this week, and you think he's going to run for more than his PrizePicks projection, and that Joe Burrow is going to continue to throw for more than his PrizePicks projection. You put those two together, and boom, you can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks. And all you have to do, by the way, if you want up to 100 times your money, is put together 4 correct picks. So I'm thinking Jamar Chase, Chase Brown. We'll just go Bengals heavy. We'll certainly take the less than on Sheldon Rankins sacks and less than on Geno Stone interceptions. All right, I kid. But you can get in right now on daily fantasy the way it should be by downloading the PrizePicks app and using code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download PrizePicks today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks. Run your game.
James, did you want to wrap up any thoughts on Geno Stone before we get to the rest of these free agents and round out the conversation on the free agent class and get to the Duke Tobin conversation a little bit?
Yeah, I think the Geno Stone fit element, I think it ties in there. Those are things that the Bengals absolutely nailed with Mike Hilton's fit, DJ Reader's fit. Got it wrong with Trey Waynes. But outside of that, during their run, how many free agents Trey Hendrickson's fit did they get right? And now we see this pattern with safeties where Nick Scott just looks completely lost. And it's like, oh, well, it's a Nick Scott problem. They're going to go get Geno Stone. He had 7 picks in Baltimore. Okay. And the other point, you mentioned Mike Macdonald, and he leaves and he goes to Seattle, and it's this huge loss for the Ravens. The Seahawks could have used a Geno Stone, and it doesn't feel like they went after him that hard. And I do think that is one of those things where you look at it and you're like, that's interesting. That's interesting that they didn't go that route. So just something I noted back in March, but you're like, we'll see. It should be fine. Well, it hasn't been fine, Jake.
Another common factor with those two guys, and this is an oversimplification, I'm not saying this is exactly what happened, is they both had great games against the Bengals last year. And we joke about it a little bit, but this is a pretty common theme around the NFL. The Bengals are no exception. When you see players have good games against your team, those guys end up on free agent target lists, right or wrong. And in this case, those moves haven't paid off. The other free agent signings for the Bengals this offseason for external guys, Zach Moss had been okay. He had been a frequent target of praise from Bengals leadership, including Joe Burrow, for being about the right stuff, being in the right place, being at the right time. and being a very reliable player, but he wasn't a difference maker. And you did feel the drop off in receiving production at the running back position this year. I think you continue to feel that. Von Bell, they brought him back essentially for free. Hard to be too critical of that move, but hasn't been the Von Bell that was a great fit the first time they signed him when he was running back there with Jesse Bates, who was obviously a great fit in this defense. Trent Brown was playing fine, got hurt. They had issues, I think, getting him brought up to speed. Maybe that's just a Trent Brown issue. That's a common refrain throughout his career. And it was an unfortunate injury for Trent Brown. I don't think that was a bad move. And Mike Gesicki, I think, has been a pretty good move. But you're one for, as far as guys that have made a continued impact on this team for one reason or another, whether it's injury or fit. You go back to last year, you're one for Orlando Brown Jr., along with Cody Ford, Nick Scott, Irv Smith, Sidney Jones, Terrell Basham. Not a whole lot of impact there, but Orlando Brown, undoubtedly a good move. Definitely missing the impact signings, like you mentioned, of guys like Mike Hilton, Chidobe Awuzie, Trey Hendrickson, DJ Reader, those excellent free agents they signed in 2020 and 2021. And even Ted Karras, Alex Kappa, who have been long-term impact players for this team in 2022. They've not had those hits with that regularity lately. And when you combine that with the draft, well, we turn our attention to Duke Tobin. Denny Miller.
By the way, before you do that, I disagree with you on one thing. The receiving production out of the running back room has been fine. They're going to have more running back receptions this year than they did last year. And look, it is what it is. You lose Zach Moss, and that's going to hurt some. But Chase Brown has 30 receptions this year. Zach Moss has 23. Joe Mixon had 55. You had Chase Brown with 14 last year. I think Mixon had 53. But Chase Brown had 14. Travion Williams had 7. Like, it's going to be similar. I don't think it's going to be that different. It may feel a little different, but outside of a few plays, they weren't really that explosive to the running backs out of the backfield anyways last year.
The reception numbers and stuff might look similar, but the way that those guys are playing as receivers, I think, is visibly worse, even if the stats end up the same. But not
the stats guy says that. Oh my God, Jake, the stats guy said. No, I get it. No, I get the. I think Joe Mixon's a much more natural receiver than Chase Brown for sure. And maybe they're not using these guys the same way. But I think Zach Moss was pretty natural with the ball in his hand and catching the ball. And that's why I thought he had value before he got hurt, when people were poo-pooing the idea of him being on the field. So we'll see if Herbert can help make up for that. He hasn't done that in the past, so we'll see. But I just don't think it's a huge drop off there necessarily.
Not a planned discussion here, and not something we're going to get into in further depth today. We've both made our cases there. We don't need to go further. Coming up next, let's transition to a topic focusing more on Duke Tobin. We will talk about the hot seat, proverbially, for Duke Tobin that may or may not exist. Certainly exists for fans, James, judging from our questions in this week's mailbag. We've talked about the coaches. We've talked about some players this week. We will spend some more time talking about this front office coming up next.
Locked On Bengals fans and listeners, make sure you check out Ultimate Pro Football GM. We're going to talk about Duke Tobin's future, and is he on the hot seat? Well, Ultimate Pro Football GM has everything you could ask for, because you can be the franchise GM, you can lead it to glory, and now you have a new head coach career mode that you can take the reins of a franchise. So on top of getting your dynasty by drafting players, signing free agents, hiring the coaching staff, you can now call offensive plays as well. This is literally a Bengals fan's dream right now, because what are you talking about? You're talking about the Bengals front office and the play calling and Zach Taylor. You can do it all with Ultimate Pro Football GM. It's completely free, has no ads, and is 100% playable offline. So guess what? When I fly to Los Angeles this week, Ultimate Pro Football GM is going to be my go-to. It can be yours as well. All you have to do is download it in the App Store. And here's a special offer for Locked On Bengals fans. Use the promo code Locked On NFL, all caps, inside the game store to receive a free boost to your franchise. Make sure to get it, as this perk will jumpstart your play and give you the advantage as you create your dynasty. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com, ultimate-gm.com, or look it up in the App Store. And again, use promo code LOCKEDONNFL.
James, the next question in our mailbag comes from Stinny Millie at Os10 with some underscores around it on Twitter. Stinny Millie says he hasn't heard the proposition of Duke Tobin possibly being on the hot seat, with the majority of the problems coming from a lack of talent. Not sure how he's not in question. And let's just say this wasn't the only question about Duke Tobin being on the hot seat or requesting us to do an episode talking about the front office and the hot seats there after we spent some time on other hot seats this week. So Stinny Millie, while you haven't heard the proposition, I think we've alluded to it. We'll get into it now. And certainly other fans have the same question.
Yeah, I think, can you put the family on the hot seat? Like that would be it, right? I get Duke has his flaws, and there's been flaws in drafting, the free agent signings, all of those things. But if you gave Duke Tobin truth serum, you don't think he would have wanted to have kept Jesse Bates or pay T. Higgins or keep DJ Reader? And I'm sure maybe one or two of those things he agreed with. Maybe he agreed with all of them, and I'm just not believing. But I would imagine that's the case. And so that's what's tough, is if you're him, you've had to try. You got these guys, and you drafted these guys, and you got it right. Now you're trying to replace them, and it's just hard. But part of it is it's just hard. Now, the other part of it is you should be able to get some defensive line picks right. You should be able to nail some of these cornerback selections, which now feel really rough. And that's the other element here, is the past few drafts have just been so brutal. You should be able to draft quality offensive linemen, and maybe they did that this past year. But outside of Amarius Mims and Matt Lee, can we say that? I think Cordell Volson certainly trending in the wrong direction. And so it's like, man, there's these areas, these problem areas that continue to happen, and you lose these other players that you have hit on in the draft. And now it's been so long since you've had clear wins. Like, I think Dax Hill is a win, but he's not a clear win, and he's not contributing right now. So it's hard to say because he's hurt. And so it's like, you look at it and it's rough right now. So do I think Duke Tobin's on the hot seat? I don't. And I'm not sure what would necessarily change. I think he does a good job of balancing things the way the Bengals are structured, but he certainly needs to be better, and they need to be better. I don't care about the size of the scouting department. They still need to be better in the draft. And that's been a rough spot, I would say, over the past few years in a very specific areas that are huge weaknesses on this team right now.
You talk about finding clear wins in the draft. And there's this bigger issue of tying in the draft classes and free agency and where the coaching staff has input, and they're giving their ideas of what players they want to target and how the coaching staff and front office are or are not on the same page for certain players. We talked about the language that the front office versus the coaching staff used around Dax Hill at times, especially this offseason, where, the front office is like, we think Dax is a good player. The defensive coaching staff has to figure out a plan. So there's all these elements, but I think there's this very clear idea of like, okay, let's try to find clear wins in the Bengals draft. You can go all the way back to when Joe Burrow was drafted. Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, Logan Wilson, clear wins.
Yep.
Jamar Chase, clear win. You would probably say Evan McPherson, clear win as well, 5th round pick who's gotten an extension, fair to say.
Yep.
And then Eric All, dealing with an injury now. That's not the Bengals' fault, but did have the injuries in school. Is a good player, but now has the injury question over his head. Where's a clear win since Jamar Chase? Since
Chase Brown, probably.
Chase Brown, yeah, that would probably be it.
5th round running back. Yeah, that's insane that it took that long. Because you better believe, Jake, that if we were just drafted, and this isn't patting ourselves on the back. It's the opposite. It's saying, like, even us, if we just drafted all their picks, we would have had clear wins.
Even these chuckleheads on Locked On Bengals, man.
But you know what I'm saying? Like, we're not the ones going to scouting these guys and going all over and meeting and the Bengals, by the way, they're scouting. They do plenty of that through the week when their visits aren't necessarily reported. Like, I know their scouts are on the road right now actively. So there's a lot of that on social media. So I just missed that. Whatever. But you got to get it right some of the time in these picks. And again, I think Amarius is going to be a hit, but it's too early, and it shouldn't go from 21 to 24 outside of a 5th round running back, where we're talking about clear hits and clear wins for a team, regardless of where you're drafting and what round you're drafting them in, especially with a team that values their draft pick so much because they value the draft. It's rough.
You can even go back to before Joe Burrow.
Oh no, don't do it.
And then you're looking like Jermaine Pratt, 3rd round pick in 2019.
Drew Sample
was your 2nd round pick. Jonah Williams was your 1st round pick.
DK Metcalf was right there. Jay.
Year before that, it's Billy Price in the 1st round before Jesse Bates and Sam Hubbard
Lamar
in the 2nd and 3rd rounds. Save your draft. 2017, John Ross.
And I loved him, but man.
Like
who
the
was
hits in the draft just aren't there outside of a couple of top 5 picks. It's just not consistent enough. T. Higgins, great pick as well. Logan Wilson, good pick as well. But
yeah,
there's this whole thing where between draft picks and the free agent choices, it's just not working right now.
Yeah.
And it's been that way for at least the Zach Taylor era, where they've gotten by with Burrow and Chase and Higgins and some of the free agents that they did hit on early in this era of Bengals football.
Yeah.
But man, is it been inconsistent for all the talk about consistency that we hear from this team.
And that's why it's like, the Bengals are good at drafting receivers. They'll find a replacement for T. Higgins. It's hard. The same team that found AJ Green and Marvin Jones and Mohamed Sanu. Well, what happened? Well, they get Tyler Boyd and Brandon LaFell in free agency, and then they're like, John Ross, which again, I was on board with the pick if you're not taking a quarterback, but it's hard to get it right year in and year out. And so when you get it wrong in the draft, you have to be able to spend to correct it and be aggressive in free agency or trade to correct it, and vice versa. And when you're getting it wrong in both spaces, in both places, this is what you see. Is you see a very flawed roster that is arguably the most top-heavy roster in the league, because there's like 3 guys and then the rest of it. Even though there are guys on the rest of the roster that are making a lot of money, they're not performing up to their salary, which really hurts because you haven't drafted well to help hide some of those shortcomings.
And there are some other players that are like good. Mike Hilton certainly one that stands out as like a guy that is a good player. BJ Hill is a good player, but you have an MVP candidate, an offensive player of the year candidate, and a defensive player of the year candidate right now, and you're 4 and 6. Tells you something about the top heaviness of the roster.
Can you somehow, some way get Mike Hilton on the field a bit more on money downs? Don't care if you worry about him covering. No corner can cover. Just throwing that one out there.
Let's get one more.
Playmakers, baby. He makes plays, Jake. Anyways.
Does make plays. Let's get one last question here quick from Patrick G. If James and Jake had $15 million laying around to spend to improve the Cincinnati Bengals, how would you allocate those funds? High impact player on offense or defense, putting the salary cap aside, expanding the scouting department, player development, or coaching, or an analytics department investment? Where would you spend that money, James?
You better believe I'm spending that on some playmakers. And I would 15 million in cap or just straight cash? That's the question.
Cap aside was the way Patrick
aside. So cash, I got it. I get it. Cash. Well, first I would redo the media room. No, I'm just kidding. No, I would I would certainly invest in some playmakers. You can't have enough. And what does that mean? Well, that means 15 million this year could have gotten you Calais Campbell. It could have re-signed DJ Reader, and it along with Rankins if you wanted to, right? But Campbell and Reader, and then you could have went out and you could have maybe you trade for a weapon and you absorb that with that cash money. There's a lot of ways to go about it, but honestly, with how weapons driven I am in the draft, I think I would have been able to address the other side of the ball, the defensive trenches, and maybe get a veteran guard as well. So I would have put it into the roster around Joe Burrow. I mean, could you imagine if they had a one more veteran guard / tackle, a guy that can maybe do both right now, plus a legitimate interior pass rush with DJ Reader / Calais Campbell? I would feel a lot differently about this team, and I think they'd be 2 wins better, I would say.
Yeah, I wouldn't argue with any of those things for the sake of being different. Let's say we put the money into analytics and the scouting department and modernize there. And I guess the argument there would be, well, if you have more than one person doing analytics for your team, maybe there's two now. If you have more than a couple of scouts and you really embrace modernity in your front office, because we can't do anything about the way they negotiate contracts. I would hire a negotiator as well, and a real GM that has full GM responsibilities, including negotiations of contracts. And I would get that off of the family's plate and let the family be owners and take them out of football operations further. But
I'm available.
Because the family is going to do what the family is going to do, for better and for worse. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it leads to frustrations.
Yeah.
Let's modernize everything else and give us a better chance of getting things right, because what you're doing right now is not getting things right enough, as we just outlined. The consistency of finding contributors in the draft, high-level contributors in the draft in particular, finding free agents that fit your team and make you better has fallen off in recent years for one reason or another. And so my thinking is perhaps we could spend $15 million. I mean, you're talking $15 million on front office investments. You could do a lot with $15 million to improve your front office.
I'll do it for $1 million. And then I'll hire the right people to negotiate the contracts and do it. I just oversee it. No, I'm serious. I'm dead serious. I'm not saying I would do any of that stuff. I would hire the right people that could do it. And I would draft Jahmyr Gibbs in the first round.
There's just too much
naming a draft crush. That's all,
Yeah. There's just a lot of, a lot of familiarity hires in the NFL, a lot of familiarity signings in the NFL. Even Xavier Howard, who we talked about yesterday, coming into Cincinnati because he has a connection with Lou Anarumo. Like, probably have to get away from that a little bit. That's the entire league, though. That's not just a Bengals problem.
Yeah, I would have been fine. They should have got the deal done, as we said on yesterday's show. Like, that's a no-brainer. It should have been done a month ago if Lou wanted him. I'll still do the show, by the way, just so you know. It'll be in the deal.
Some conflict.
I'll do Locked On from my office. No way. No way. It'll be fine.
Let's wrap up the show there. We're back tomorrow with a crossover as we look ahead to Sunday Night Football and turn our attention to Week 11. Until then, thanks for listening to this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.